Okay, to go along with President Roosevelt's election in 1932 to the office of the presidency, he introduced a program to help aid the people. And that program, its name was the New Deal. And we're going to look at four parts of the program. The first one was a civilian conservation corps. The idea of this was, again, we needed to get men back to work immediately, and we needed to get money in their pockets so they could get it to their families. People had no money, so you couldn't pay for heat, housing bills, you couldn't pay for milk. So we're going to get men back to work. So we got men. Young men, usually between the ages of 18 and 25 years old. They would be taken out in buses, and they'd be transported all around in the Midwest primarily. The men would pave new roads, repair roads. They would develop parks. So the idea of having a city park or a park along a lake and that was developed at this time. Now, the point here is I have to get men back to work, but this is going to expand the powers of the federal government immensely, because where in the Constitution does it say that you have the power to borrow money, federal government, to plant trees and develop parks and build roads? It's a nice thing, but you're borrowing money with not expressly written into the Constitution. Remember, though, Roosevelt had been elected with a landslide. 2/3 if the senators were Democrats and 3/4 of the House of Representatives were Democrats, so he could do just about anything he wanted. In addition to doing those projects, they also helped soil erosion alongside the highways and that, and flood control projects. How it worked was these guys would make $30 a month. They would be housed and fed in tents somewhere out in the country, somewhere away from home. The men would be taken care of. They'd be fed, as I mentioned. All their needs were taken care of. But at the end of the month, $25 of it was sent directly back home. And you usually wanted to hire someone who was married. And they'd take that money and get it back to their wife and their family so they could go buy groceries. They could get back to having a somewhat normal life. They received free food, uniforms, and about 3,000 men participated in this project. Most of the camps, as I mentioned, were located in the Great Plains area, and this is going to, significant. You're planting 200 million trees during this 3-year, 4-year period. The next one was, remember, one of the guarantees from Roosevelt was he was going to fix the banking scandals, and the Securities Exchange program that he put in place was created in 1934, got elected in 32, and it's going to monitor the stock market. And what it does is no one before the Securities Exchange was guaranteeing that a company that was being sold on the stock market, again, publicly traded companies are sold on the stock market. You can buy shares of it. So let's use the example of Hershey's chocolate. Hershey chocolate comes on board, and they show a base of $100, and you want to buy stock in it. Before the Securities Exchange Commission, there was no guarantee that these investors had truly put in the money that was said to be in the bank or in the company, and you didn't know who these investors were. After the Securities and Exchange came along, they enforced laws and monitored companies to make sure that this company that was being sold on the market was a solid company, and that an investor buying into a company, buying shares into a company, would be well informed of what the company was, what the investors that had invested in the company were, what was the idea behind it, and then you could make an informed decision of whether or not you were buying into a good thing. it was a really good idea, because before that, anything and anyone could be on there. The next one was directly to deal with our banks. Remember, most of them, 1,000 different banks went under during the Depression. So the idea of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, now makes it underneath the Glass-Steagall Banking Act, which was a big deal, now said to banks that the federal government will guarantee up to $250,000 of money that each person puts into a bank. They will guarantee that up to $250,000. Now, if you put more than $250,000 into a bank, the FDIC says, okay, that could be at risk. You could lose that. Question: why would the federal government say we'll only guarantee you up to $200,000? Today's terms, that's not that much money. For an average worker, that's quite a bit, but even today, I mean, especially today, that would be very attainable for a business. Why do they only guarantee $250,000? The answer is they want people in one bank. They want people that have money to store their money in a variety of banks. So in case a scandal or a problem comes and certain banks are wiped out, other banks will still be healthy. So again, the federal government, on my money, they will guarantee my money up to $250,000. So if I have $100,000 in the bank and the market goes in the tank and all goes bad and I go to get my money, I'm guaranteed I'm going to get it. Okay. Now, there's a little tiny glitch in there that most people don't realize, and that is that the FDIC has up to 99 years to pay you back. So you may not get it right away. More than likely, you'll get it sometime before that period, but they do have that stipulation in the clause that if there was a shortage, if there was a banking scandal, if there was a worldwide crisis, they do have up to 99 years to get you paid back. Next is the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, the Tennessee Valley Authority primarily dealt with Tennessee, Alabama, and the surrounding area, but the idea of it is going to be nationwide. It affects us here in Idaho. And what it was a massive project of taking and building dams for power plants and conservation for farmers storing up floodwater so they can irrigate their fields. It was enormous. Here in Idaho, Hells Canyon dams, the series of dams on the Snake River, is a direct relationship, not a part of the TVA, but it's a directly came from that we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres that, because of dams, they have flooded. Those are used for both power and they're used for irrigation for farmers, so they can have enough water to fill the ditches to irrigate their crops. So the Tennessee Valley Authority, again, along with all these things, nowhere in the Constitution does it give President Roosevelt the authority to do this, but we're in dire need, and in dire need, dire things sometimes happen. And he puts this in place to, again, put people back to work, help farmers have water to irrigate their crops and not just rely on rain. The next one, what affects all of us, is the Social Security Act. Now, the Social Security Act was put in place because when the Depression hit, you had a bunch of older people, sorry about that, I'm still fighting this darn cold, a bunch of older people that had stopped working because they weren't physically able to continue to go to work and lift whatever it was, those sugar bags anymore. They stayed home. And when the economy had collapsed in 1929, You had parents, grandparents that were forced to move back in with their kids. They couldn't live on their own because there was nothing there that they had any money coming in. And our country realized these people have worked for us for 30, 40 years, and we've got to find a way to take care of them. In addition to that, you'd have kids that their father had something happen to him at work, or he was in the military and was killed, and now this kid had no way of having anybody take care of him. So the Social Security Act was to provide old age insurance programs. It was to aid dependent families with dependent children. So dependent families being, I got 3 kids and my father or the dad goes off and dies at work in a work accident. The father is killed in the military. They'll pay their kids a certain stipend until they reach the age of 18. Then that'll end. And the way we were going to fund this was they take every single worker and they're going to take a payroll deduction from every single worker. Definitely debatable whether the federal government has the power to do this, to take that money and put it into an account, draw interest, make loans with it, and then give money off of that. Now, the idea of the Social Security Act works as long as you have more people working than you do retired. It has a problem when you have more people retiring than working, and we are getting awfully close to getting to the year where we're going to have people, more people, elderly people retiring, and having to rely on some federal regulations to withdraw certain amounts from their IRA, and that's coming up. That's in 5 years, 6 years. That's going to happen, and there's talk of that really having problems with our economy. But the Social Security Act was never meant to be a sole program to fund everyone. So if you're out there thinking, well, when I retire, I'm just going to use Social Security. No, you won't live on it. There's not enough money in it. It will never work that way. It's just a supplement. You better have something on your own. 2, by the time you children get to be this age, if they have not done something to Social Security, it will have gone bankrupt. You will never see a dime of it. My generation and myself is going to see it go bankrupt unless we change something. So more than likely, you're going to have to see people work longer and not retire at 62 or 65 as they're doing right now. Last thing I want to mention is in 1935, Franklin Roosevelt is rocking and rolling, and he is getting just about everything he wants. But the framers of the Constitution said we are concerned with one branch or one person having too much power. That's why we have 3 separate branches of government that all do checks and balances on each one. So when the president would do certain things, the Supreme Court would say, no, that's unconstitutional. The Constitution does not allow you to have that much power. So in 1935, one of the programs that Roosevelt was trying to implement, the Agriculture Adjustment Act and the National Industry Recovery Act, were found to be unconstitutional. This drives Roosevelt nuts. And Roosevelt then tries to do what they call pack the court. Roosevelt proposes to Congress to enact a reform bill that would reorganize the Supreme Court and to allow him to take the number of 9 Supreme Court justices and make it into 15. He was going to try to appoint 6 new justices, and that's where he's going to try to pack the court and get everything he wants. Both government, legislative branch, the Supreme Court, and the American people said, no, we're not going to allow you to have that kind of power. And it was struck down. This is much like some of the things other presidents have had tried to introduce. The Supreme Court said we're leery of having one person, the president, have too much power. I think this could be true with Mr. Trump if he tried to take the idea of anchor babies. Babies that are born in the United States are guaranteed to be U.S. citizens underneath the 14th Amendment. But he's saying there's a clause in the 14th Amendment that says under the jurisdiction of. Well, he's saying under the jurisdiction and idea that these people have entered our country legally. If these people entered our country illegally and have a baby, that measure does not go to them. And I don't know. I would think the Supreme Court would say there may be merit to that, but they would probably be very leery to allow the president to change the Constitution of the United States with an executive order. So I'm not sure. There are the 4 programs that we wanted to look at that you should know about on the test. The CCC, the Treasure Valley Authority, the flood, and the power plants, the TVA, the SCC, and that's the Security and Exchange, and the FDIC, Federal Deposit, and that's for the banks. SEC is for the stock market. The TVA is for getting people back to work and moving, and the CCC was to get people back to work and moving, and it was successful. So there you go, guys. There's our lecture on the Supreme Court and the New Deal.